On the night of May 12, 1945, 3 days after the war ended in Europe, a different war was still raging in a Burmese jungle, and on a riverbank near a village called Tongda, a single rifleman was about to face something that no military training fully prepares a man for. Victory in Europe had not reached Burma yet. Not in any meaningful sense. The men of the 14th Army, the Forgotten Army they called themselves because they had been fighting in heat and jungle and monsoon rain since 1942, and the newspapers at home rarely covered it, were still locked in some of the hardest fighting of the entire war. The Japanese were defending every inch of territory with an intensity that had not diminished, and they were skilled, and they were determined, and on this particular night they were massing on the opposite bank of the Irrawaddy River, preparing to attack a British-held position. The position was defended, in part, by 3 men of the 1st Battalion, 8th Gurkha Rifles. One of them was Rifleman Lachhiman Gurung. He was 25 years old. He was 5 feet 3 inches tall. He weighed approximately 130 pounds. Before that night was over, he would have killed or wounded more than 30 enemy soldiers. He would have done it with one hand. Nepal in the early 20th century was a country defined by altitude and isolation. A kingdom folded into the Himalayas where the valleys were cultivated with extraordinary care and the high ridges belonged to wind and rock, and the distance from the rest of the world was not a disadvantage but a way of life. The Gurung people, one of the hill peoples of Nepal, concentrated in the Gandaki zone in the center of the country, had a long tradition of military service with the British. Since the early 19th century, when the British East India Company and the Kingdom of Nepal fought a war and discovered in each other a mutual respect that outlasted the conflict, Gurkha soldiers had served in the Indian Army. They had fought in every major British engagement of the 19th century and through both world wars. They brought to military service a combination of physical toughness forged by mountain life, a cultural tradition of personal honor, and a quality that British officers wrote about repeatedly in dispatches but found difficult to define, a kind of bedrock steadiness under conditions that unraveled other men. Lachhiman Gurung was born in the Palpa district of Nepal around 1920. He enlisted in the Indian Army in 1940, assigned to the 1st Battalion, 8th Gurkha Rifles. He trained, deployed, and was posted to Burma, the vast, difficult theater of war where the British and Indian and Commonwealth forces had been fighting the Imperial Japanese Army in conditions of extraordinary hardship since the Japanese invasion of 1942. He was a rifleman, a good one. Nothing in the record suggests that he was exceptional in ways that would have stood out to his officers before the night of May 12. He was a soldier doing his job in a place the world was barely watching. Burma is worth understanding on its own terms, because the men who fought there deserve to have the context of their war known. The Japanese invasion of Burma began in January 1942 and succeeded within months. The British and Indian forces were driven out of Burma in the longest retreat in British military history. 900 miles, in brutal heat, pursued by Japanese forces that moved faster and lived harder than their opponents had anticipated. It was a catastrophe that the army spent the following years working to reverse. The reconquest of Burma, the campaign that Lachhiman Gurung was part of, began in earnest in 1943 and intensified through 1944 and into 1945. It was fought in dense jungle, across rivers swollen by monsoon, in temperatures that sapped endurance and turned wounds septic and made supply nearly impossible. Malaria and dysentery killed nearly as many men as combat. The men who fought through it came to call themselves the Forgotten Army because public attention was overwhelmingly focused on Europe and on the Pacific Island campaigns, and they felt, correctly, that what they were doing was not being witnessed. By May 1945, the campaign was in its final stages. The Japanese were retreating toward the Thai border, fighting rearguard actions wherever they could, and the Allies were pressing to close the exits. The 17th Indian Division, which included the 8th Gurkha Rifles, was operating around the town of Pegu, and elements of the battalion were positioned along the Irrawaddy at a point near Tongda. The position was a forward slit trench, a fighting position dug into the riverbank, overlooking a crossing point. On the night of May 12, a Japanese force began moving toward it. The attack began around 2 in the morning, with the covering darkness that both sides in Burma had learned to use and fear in equal measure. Grenades came first. The Japanese were skilled grenade fighters and used them in volume, throwing them toward the British and Gurkha positions to force men into cover before the assault troops closed in. The 3 men in Lachhiman Gurung's section, a small forward position, were immediately under fire. Gurung caught a grenade that landed in the trench. He threw it back. He caught a second grenade. He threw that back as well. The third grenade landed before he could get a grip on it. He grabbed it and was in the process of throwing it when it detonated in his hand. The explosion destroyed his right hand. It also tore into his face and his right leg. He was down, bleeding, in a trench in the dark with Japanese soldiers coming across the riverbank toward him. His two comrades in the position were also wounded. The assault continued. What Lachhiman Gurung did next is described in the London Gazette citation in the controlled, bureaucratic language that military citations use for things that are almost too large for language. He loaded his rifle with his left hand and for 4 hours repelled the enemy. For hours. Alone, functionally, his comrades severely wounded and unable to fight effectively. With one hand, in the dark, against a sustained assault by Japanese troops who outnumbered him many times over. The Japanese attacked in waves. Each time they came, Gurung fired. He reloaded his bolt-action rifle one-handed, bracing the stock against his body, working the bolt with his left hand, chambering the next round, firing, repeating. He also operated his kukri, the curved Gurkha fighting knife, when the attackers got close enough to require it. The citation records that each time the enemy came, Gurung's response was the same. Here come the Japanese. We will kill them. He was not performing this for an audience. There was no audience. He was saying it to himself and to whatever men could still hear him, and he meant it and he proved it, and when dawn finally came to that riverbank and the Japanese assault had broken and the sun came up over the Irrawaddy, Lachhiman Gurung was found in his position. He was surrounded by the bodies of 31 Japanese soldiers. He was alive. His right arm was later amputated below the elbow. He had lost it in the act of protecting it from his own comrades. The Victoria Cross citation was gazetted on November 9, 1945. It is a document of deliberate understatement, as all VC citations are. The British tradition holds that these things should not be overstated, but even within that tradition, the bare facts carry their own weight. Rifleman Lachhiman Gurung, showing outstanding bravery and devotion to duty of the highest order in the face of the enemy. He was presented the Victoria Cross by the Viceroy of India in a ceremony in 1945. He returned to Nepal. He lived for another 65 years. There is something in that span, the Victoria Cross at 25 and then 6.5 more decades of ordinary life in Nepal. That is worth sitting with. The things he had done on the riverbank were extraordinary by any measure, and they were over in a single night. What remained was a very long life, lived quietly, in the hills of the country he had come from. He gave interviews occasionally in old age. He spoke of that night with the directness that characterized many combat veterans. Not dramatizing it, not diminishing it, simply describing what had happened and why. He had thrown back the grenades because the position had to be held. He had continued fighting with one hand because stopping was not something he considered. He was a Gurkha. This was what Gurkhas did. He died in 2010 at the age of 92, in Pokhara, Nepal. He was buried with full military honors. A considerable number of people, including veterans of the Brigade of Gurkhas and members of the British government, attended or sent formal tribute. The Gurkha Museum in Winchester holds documents related to his service. The London Gazette citation is available to anyone who wants to read it, and it rewards the reading, not for what it dramatizes, but for what it refuses to dramatize, trusting the facts alone to carry the weight. The Victoria Cross has been awarded 1,358 times since it was created by Queen Victoria in 1856. Of those, 182 have gone to Gurkha soldiers, a proportion that is not coincidental. The Gurkha tradition of military service is sometimes explained in terms that reduce it to toughness, or fearlessness, or the physical conditioning of mountain life. These things are all real, but the accounts of men like Lachhiman Gurung suggest something more specific. A quality of resolution that persists after the conditions that produce it, fear, pain, isolation, impossibility, have made resolution seem unreasonable. He was alone on a riverbank. He had lost his hand. Japanese soldiers were coming at him in waves. Under those circumstances, the decision to keep fighting is not made once. It is made again and again, For 4 hours, each time the next wave comes and each time the pain and the blood loss and the darkness offer a perfectly reasonable argument for stopping. He did not stop. His name is not well known outside Gurkha regimental history and the community of people who follow Victoria Cross citations. The war he fought in was already the forgotten army's war when it was being fought, and the decades since have not reversed that forgetting as much as they should. But on a riverbank in Burma, on a night in May 1945, when Europe had just celebrated its liberation and the newspapers were full of photographs of flags and crowds and Churchill's V sign, a man with one hand was holding a position alone against everything the world was throwing at him. And he held it. And in the morning, the sun came up. If this story moved you, subscribe to follow the Untold Front. New stories every week.